What up, cucks? It's your boy, the hater, and I wanted to do a quick video and sound like a grandpa and talk about the current generation of people. You know what I'm saying? The young people, the teenagers of the time, right? I believe there's still Generation Z and like whatever, Generation Alpha, I think, is like on the come up, but Generation Z, Gen Z, is still the one that has all the problems. Now, like every generation before them, Gen Z believes that they are the coolest and most hip generation of all time, right? Now, this is just a normal fact of life, right? Every generation believes that they are cooler, more hip, and honestly, they also believe they are smarter than the last generation, right? And I'm here to tell you that I personally believe that this is largely true, right? When you go back and watch something from like the 20s and you see some goofy ass shit, you're like, man, that was goofy, right? The people back then didn't think it was goofy, but you do because things have changed, right? Now, normally, this is definitely the case, right? But as we've seen in our society and in our culture, and when I say in our culture, I'm talking specifically about America, but, you know, this is definitely true elsewhere in the world, right? The global culture is really what I'm fundamentally talking about here, right? Things have gone way astray in the last like 10, 15 years. So for the first time ever, right? For the first time, I think in the history of America at least, right? The next generation is vastly inferior to the previous one. Now, I know what you're all thinking, right? Hater, every other generation says that too, right? The boomers said that about the millennials, right? And the millennials are not saying it about Gen Z, right? And while the hater concedes that point, right? There is a difference, right? When boomers say that about millennials, they have nothing to hang their hat on, right? They're just saying it to say it, right? They're like, oh, all these millennials are ungrateful, right? There's just really no truth to it, right? Millennials are hardworking, right? They get this stereotype that they don't like to work, but they are hardworking because they're the generation that's working for basically peanuts, right? They're working for nothing, motherfucks. You know what I mean? At least in proportion to the value of the dollar. That's why you see all of these like boomers, and that's why the phrase "okay, boomer" came out, right? Because you see all these people who are like completely out of touch. They're like, well, why don't you save up money for being a waiter and buy a house, right? These things that were definitely feasible in like the 60s and 70s, right? You could have a young girl, you know, and with the tips from her diner job, she could pay her way through college. Now, with the tips from your waiter job, you can't pay your rent, you know what I'm saying? Let alone pay your way through college or buy a house, right? So, you know, the boomers, in my opinion, are the worst generation. They're just a failed generation. It's a generation of spineless people who never really did anything impressive. Like, if you really think about it, right? Like, we have, like, of course, obviously there are exceptions, like boomers invented the internet, but, you know, let's think about it logically, right? The greatest generation, the World War II generation, right? The ones that grew up during that, you know, they're the ones that are badasses, right? And then the boomers are the ones that were born after this, and they pretty much had like a great economy, you know, largely like right after the Great Depression, and you know, eventually after World War II, things were just booming everywhere, right? And the baby boomers just pretty much had everything handed to them. They had a great economy, and they are an inconsistent generation, right? They are simultaneously the generation to tell us that, you know, being gay is like morally wrong, and then they're the same generation that later were, you know, says like, oh, being gay is always right, and we always stood on this side. Like, it's a hypocritical generation with, quite frankly, a bunch of losers. I mean, let's be real. Like, it's a generation of losers. Their parents were better than them, and their children are better than them, right? Their children just don't have the opportunity. Now, again, obviously, cucks, there are exceptions, right? Like, my parents are fucking great, right? I'm sure some of your parents and some of you who might be boomers are great. I'm not talking in absolutes, right? But Gen Z represents, it's like the boomer 2.0 generation, right? First of all, they are completely cucked, right? Recent studies have shown that Gen Z is less likely to do a lot of harmful behavior, you know, to be fair, right? They're less likely to do drugs. They're less likely to have sex, right? They're less likely to do risky things, right? Largely, this is because they live on the internet and there's like no risk, you know, they don't know what it's like to like bruise their knee, you know what I'm saying? But anyways, the one that I wanted to focus on was they're less likely to have sex, right? Because I think this speaks a lot to the culture generally, right? We have a generation who basically is confused as to which bathroom to use, right? Many people identify as part of the LGBTQ community, which good for them. But some of them identify as things like pansexual, right? And therefore, or even asexual, which is obviously like the weirdest one. They identify as asexual, therefore they don't have sex, but they have opinions about everything, right? And it's like, it's just a failed generation, basically. Like, things are not going to look good in the next few years. Now, obviously, once again, in Gen Z, there are some people that are not like this. It goes without saying. Like, you know, the NFL is going to keep growing, right? They're going to find the 5 athletes that are left, but the vast majority of the generation, to me, seems like just a failed generation. It's a bunch of dorks and a bunch of losers, right? This also bleeds into wrestling, but that's for another video. The fact is that this generation has never felt any hardship. Now, I've had a relatively easy life, I'm not going to lie to you, right? And all the difficulties in my life have come from me, like me fucking up, you know what I'm saying? And I own up to that, right? I never did hard drugs or anything like that, so obviously that's one thing that I'm glad for Gen Z, that they don't do drugs. But I've done basically everything else there is to do, you know what I'm saying? I've made every mistake there is to make. So, you know, no big crimes, obviously, but you know what I'm saying, right? Now, Gen Z is not going to make any of these mistakes because, quite frankly, it's difficult to make these mistakes on the internet, right? Their biggest mistake is, oh, I picked the wrong gun in Fortnite, you know what I mean? Like, that kind of pussy-ass shit, right? Now, with all this in mind, right, the language and the things that this generation is allowed to say is more limited than ever, right? I use the word cuckold a lot because there's certain words that I'm not supposed to use anymore because society has decided that we can't say these horrible words, which were honestly harmless when I was growing up. But nevertheless, the point is, cuckolds, the point is that this generation is completely stifled. That's why they have, even their lingo and their slang is just, it's just goofy, right? Like, you hear that. Like, now people say, oh, that girl is a smoke show. It doesn't even make any fucking sense, right? A smoke show has nothing to do with being hot, right? It obviously derives from smoking hot, which is a completely different connotation. Smoke show is just like what a nerd decided to say. 2 people high-fived each other, and boom, here we are. Here's some new lingo, right? Everything, it's like when I hear these kids talk, they're like, what's up, blood? Like, shut the fuck up. Like, you're a dork. You don't even know what that means. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're just using words that you read on the internet. You don't even know what the etymology is of any of these words, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, cucks, this generation is fucking doomed. You know, it's, they're overly medicated, right? Like, almost everyone that I know, like you know, the brothers and sisters of my friends and, you know, cousins of people that I know, like, that are younger, a lot of these fucking kids are being medicated. A shitload of them are in therapy. And you know what? Like, I mean, I'm not here to judge. You know, I've never been to therapy. I've never been medicated, you know, but I know that some people are fucked. So good for them for taking care of themselves. But the fact is, it's impossible for an entire generation to suffer from anxiety and depression, right? It's fucking weird. And the reality is that this should not be tolerated. It's time to make some men out of people. The greatest example that I can give of this is, I'm sure a lot of you have seen it. It's called Deal or No Deal Island, right? Pretty decent show. Kind of like Survivor a little bit, but more so like Deal or No Deal. And in this show, there's this kid named Aaron, right? This kid is just a very unfortunate, he's like, you know, must be in his 20s. He's just a very unfortunate man, right? Because he's small and skinny and scrawny. And then there's an episode where, like, this girl that he's, like, talking to, who's, like, a lesbian, by the way, but he clearly has, like, a schoolboy crush on her. Like, this girl gets eliminated, and this guy has a fucking panic, anxiety attack in the middle of the show. And he was someone that I liked during this season, right? But when I saw this, I'm like, what the fuck, man? Man up, you little bitch. You know what I'm saying? Having a panic attack on TV. If you're a grown-ass man and you use words like, I'm having a panic attack, oh, my anxiety is getting to me, oh, I'm being bullied, then you need to fucking hit the gym and listen to some hater videos, motherfucks, because this life is not going to be nice to you, right? The truth is that there are people out there that will still challenge you, right? And there are people out there that will belittle you because you do not stand up for yourself. And with all that being said, cucks, this generation has not learned these skills, right? When you have your parents, your pussy-ass parents, interfere and, you know, call the principal because you're being bullied, right? And, you know, take you to therapy because Johnny has anxiety instead of telling you to shut the fuck up. Your great-grandpa fought in a war when he was like 17, motherfucks. And here you are, like a pussy, crying because I didn't get my way. I never get my way. Nobody listens to me. Yeah, maybe because you suck, motherfucker. And that's the problem. The problem is the external locus of control are higher than they've ever been, right? Gen Z takes no responsibility for any of their shortcomings. Like I have seen people, like it's usually fat fucks. I'm not gonna lie to you. There's this one fat guy. He was a waiter at this place that I would hang out at. And he was like, I have depression. And depression manifests differently in everybody. Oh, so you all have something different then. So don't fucking group it all together, cucks. Right? And then I told him, I was like, look, man, with all due respect, because he and I became friendly. Up until this point, I'm like, with all due respect, do you think you'd be depressed if you weren't fucking fat and you hit the gym and you didn't look goofy and you didn't have to lie about everything like this guy would like sit and he'd be like, yeah, I have like 5 businesses. Like, shut the fuck up. You're just a waiter. And there's nothing wrong with that. I used to be a waiter when I was in high school. Nothing wrong with being a waiter, cucks. But the idea that he had to like pretend that he was something more than he was. It's like, all you are is insecure. You're not really depressed. Now, I'm not saying that there's nobody that suffers from depression. There, of course, are people that do. But I believe that the vast majority of these people are full of shit. And the reason why is because they're part of Gen Z. And Gen Z incentivizes complaining, right? So instead of this guy looking at himself in the mirror and being like, wow, maybe if I fucking stop eating lard and I'm not 350 pounds, maybe then I can talk to some girls. And if I talk to some girls, maybe my confidence will go up a little bit. And then I wouldn't have to lie about these businesses. And then at the end of the day, when I go home and I take a shower every 5 days, I look at myself in the mirror and I think to myself, wow, I'm a piece of shit. And then I get depressed, right? Yeah, you get depressed because you're a piece of shit. You get depressed because you've really fucked yourself. You fisted your own ass, motherfuckers. And what you've done to yourself is hold yourself back. But if you solve these problems, I bet you won't be depressed no more. If that guy starts looking like Brad Pitt all of a sudden and is pulling ass and making money, he's not going to be depressed anymore. You know what I'm saying? And that's the problem with Gen Z. They just accept their lot in life, right? They're just weak. They're weaklings. And they have the nerve to say things like, oh, like, this is an out-of-touch boomer, or this is an out-of-touch millennial. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? You're a generation of fucking weirdos. You're a generation of people who don't know what clothes you should wear to fit in at school. You know what I'm saying? You're a generation of people who aren't sure which bathroom to use and what pronouns to use because you want to use that to make yourself more popular. And the fact that you can do that is fucking weird in and of itself, cucks. You know what I'm saying? And with that being said, go fuck yourselves.